In the lawyer part of our survey, over 90% of folks said that they were obviously very confident in their abilities as a lawyer. But only around 50% said that they were confident in managing the business aspects of their practice.
This is Bob Ambrogi, and you're listening to the Law Next podcast, and we are here at the Clio Cloud Conference, broadcasting live from the podcast alley here. A whole bunch of podcasters lined up here at the conference in San Diego. And right now, I am joined by George Psiharis, the COO of Clio. George, how are you today?
Doing well, Bob. Thanks for having me.
You have maybe a unique honor. You were number 6 employee at Clio. Is that right?
That's right.
Which was when did you join Clio?
That would have been back in 2010. So
how did you connect with them?
Oh, it's a great story. I actually went to school with one of Clio's co-founders, Ryan Govro. So we did our MBAs together at a university up in BC. We met, we looked at a whole bunch of startup ideas, most of which were absolutely terrible, by the way. And while all of that was going on, he indirectly got involved in a project that turned into the very early and first version of Clio. Once they got started and decided that they were going to take the product to market, I was introduced to Jack, Clio CEO Jack Newton, and shortly thereafter joined the team.
I'm trying to think of who else would have been ahead of you besides Jack and Ryan. Anybody else still here that was?
Yeah, there's a couple of our early technical experts. So if you've ever met Tice, our director of engineering, Tice Van Gaza, he was shortly before me on board, and then Fraser Newton as well, who was one of our early senior software engineers. He's since moved into a role in data science that actually he's one of the architects of our legal trends report as well, which I know we're going to spend some time on talking about today.
Yeah. So did you ever have any sense at that point that, what are we now, 12 years later? 12 years since you founded, right? Yeah. So did you ever have any sense then that what you were starting, the road you were starting down here?
It's interesting. Like, we always had the ambition, right? Like, this was always where we wanted to end up and more, right? We're still on the journey, but of course, in those moments, it seems like a long way away and unlikely. But it's been I like to describe it as a journey that, looking back, feels like an instant and an eternity at the same time somehow. Like, a lot's happened, but it all seems to have happened very quickly, and it's been a wild ride and continues to be fun every day.
Yeah, it's interesting to me when I speak to somebody like Jack or. I was having a conversation recently with the founder of Net Documents, a document management system, which launched in the cloud. Clio famously launched in the cloud, one of the first practice management systems to do that. It kind of seemed like a crazy notion at that point, right? I mean, not to you probably, but to a lot of people, lawyers were afraid of the cloud at that point. They didn't get the cloud at all. Did you ever think about that? Did you ever?
Yeah, no, it wasn't. I'd contend still very much part of the conversations we're having with industry, right? A few early learnings that came through, like, one was this was an audience that, in my opinion, was either for the first or second time buying their technology product. So this is either the first or second major technology purchase they'd be making for their firms. So often they were adjusting to the differences between the purchase they made last time and this time, or to just encountering this new category altogether. And our early days definitely involved a lot of education, a lot of partnering with regulators like bar associations and advocacy groups for lawyers to work on helping people understand, both from the ethical implications side, but also in just the simple technology side and how it was different, how encryption worked. Definitely a lot of good conversations and discussion over the years, and a big part of what we sought out to do when we first entered the marketplace. Yeah.
So from employee number 6 to fast forward to today, when the company's just received a $250 million investment. We are here at this conference with 2,000 people in attendance. You're preparing for a huge growth in the company and in hiring in your workforce. So as COO, what are the challenges for you? How do you manage all that?
It's a lot of fun. I'll start there. But, do
you sleep?
Not as much as I should. So says my wife. But, Things change in interesting ways. So we've matured through stages as a business where we now have an amazing team of people that handles so much of the day-to-day, even the operation of a conference like this.
Yeah.
Whereas, in scrappier times, it's been much more full contact,
Right.
hands-on.
Yeah.
And so certainly that enables us to operate at a more strategic level, especially me in my transition and role in the various roles in the company over the years. Overall, I think my role is to help us stay focused and prioritized on the right things.
Yeah.
Right? We're in this enviable position where there's a lot of stuff we could be doing. We've got to try to focus on the right things, both for our customers, our people, for our investors, and then to turn longer-term strategic plans into smaller bite-sized chunks, right?
Yeah.
Like, what are the things on a 5-year horizon that we want to achieve, but what do they look like, for instance, on an annual basis, on a quarterly basis? And it calls on me to be very cross-functional, too. I've got to know and collaborate with all the different parts of the business, whether that's marketing, sales, customer service, product development, and engineering, in order to make that happen.
Yeah. You have, we all heard Jack Newton deliver his keynote address yesterday, and Jack and Ryan both are visionaries with big ideas about the legal industry broadly and this company. And it sounds like your job is to kind of make that doable in a practical way.
Very much so, right? Like we have visionary founders, and the vision is both compelling and I think exciting, appropriate for the space, and it energizes both our team, but especially our audience and our customers and our ecosystem of partners. But then we got to go out and get it done, right?
Yeah.
So that's certainly where I come in and what the role is all about, and it's a lot of fun. Like, I love the fact that I get to think about a lot of different areas, and it gets to be external and customer facing with things like the Legal Trends Report, but it's also very internal and team facing as well. And I like to say that I don't really actually do that much work anymore, but I help people who do very difficult work, focus, prioritize, and turn it into an executable plan that everyone's happy with.
Well, you've alluded a couple of times to the Legal Trends Report.
Haven't I?
You keep dropping that name.
I think we ought to into it. Let's be honest.
We ought to talk about it. So this is the third year of the Legal Trends. Fourth year of the Legal Trends Report. That's right. And just for the advantage of anybody listening who might not have heard of this before, what is the Legal Trends Report? And then we can talk a little bit more about this year.
Absolutely. So the Legal Trends Report is, as you said, something we've done for the past 4 years. It's kind of our take on a big data study on the legal profession. And it's intended to kind of look at high-level patterns that we see in the profession, in the space. And so it combines insights from our active user base, so economic firm performance, KPIs at a large scale across the industry. And it also has companion surveys that look at what's going on in the heads of lawyers and what their needs and wants are, what consumers are thinking about as they go to shop for a law firm or select a law firm that they're going to work with. And then finally, more recently, and this year, a big one for us is testing what the levels of service are out in the marketplace.
Yeah, and I think it's probably important to emphasize that you are, the initial premise of this survey is you've got access to data from all of the users who are using your system, and you can look at that data and analyze trends in how lawyers work in ways that are that we weren't able to do really before, because nobody had that data before. People conjectured about it, people had thoughts about it, but the first Legal Trends Report was notable, and everyone's sense has been notable because it's one of the few data-driven surveys of what's going on in the profession. And the first one was, you can tell us, but the big headline of the first one was lawyers aren't billing all that much to get, making great use of their time, right?
Yeah. Collectively refer to that as the WTF moment that hit the industry when we when we first announced it. But you're right. There was a lot of conjecture. There was a lot of anecdote. Right. One of the things about the profession too that we often don't reflect on is that it's very fragmented. Right. In a lot of other industries, say accounting as a comparison, you'll have big four accounting firm brands in a different professional services area that they get big enough as a business that they're doing their own aggregation of trends. But in legal, we don't see a similar pattern, right? 50% of people practicing law are solos, and 80% are in firms of 1 to 10 lawyers. And so we have this fragmented service provision space where it's really hard to benchmark and compare. And you're right, by growing our customer base and anonymizing and aggregating the information we have, we're able to feed that back. And we're able to feed it back in a way that hopefully helps lawyers benchmark and understand what their common challenges are, but also informs us on what products to build, what pain points to solve for customers. And the first big one that jumped out in a big way were what we refer to as utilization rates, right? So the amount of, if we assume an 8-hour workday, most lawyers put toward billable activities, so just stuff that you could eventually be paid for. And the big one was that came in around 30% of their day.
Yeah.
So out of an 8-hour workday, that's less than 3 hours. The typical lawyer, and remember, across thousands of real-world data points.
Right.
And if we compare that to what we would get in survey responses, lawyers would say that their utilization rates are around 60%.
Yeah.
And that was the big moment, was kind of comparing perception versus reality.
Yeah. So this is year number 4 of this, and every year you've, as you say, you've done some additional outside surveys in addition to the data analysis and looked at some different issues. So what's kind of the headline? What's the big finding out of this year's survey?
Yeah, so I'd say two big headlines that were really exciting to be able to bring back this year. The first was, given that we have been doing it for a number of years, we're able to do this first multi-year study. So we took a look at firms over a 5-year period who obviously have been with us as customers over this period. And we noticed that there was a subset of firms that were growing really rapidly in terms of revenue. There are a whole bunch, thousands in each category, by the way, that were staying stable. And there was a subset that were shrinking quite substantially in terms of revenue. And we thought to ourselves, this is an opportunity to look not just at the aggregate stats, but also over a 5-year period. How are some firms managing to grow much faster than their peers? And what are the common characteristics that they have? It was inspired by a really cool book by Jim Collins called Good to Great, in which he does a study of the top performing companies out there in industry and notices a small handful that meaningfully outperformed their peers, and then goes into an analysis of what's going on in those companies. And so that was one big one for us, was reporting some of those findings. And the big takeaways there were, over a 5-year period, these firms were able to raise those utilization rates from 28 to 33%. Remember, over 5 years, right? So not a seismic shift, but incremental change.
Yeah.
And that led to, on average, 122% revenue growth over that 5-year period. So more than doubling their revenue.
Yeah. Very
substantial change. And the inverse was happening with firms that were shrinking. And we also found that raising prices didn't really help, right? It was really about getting more efficiency out of the lawyers you had and pointing more of their time toward client-facing activities. So a long one, but that was
does more efficiency mean better use of technology, or are we able to evaluate where those efficiencies came from?
So that's where the surveys come in, right? Is getting into the heads of the clients and the lawyers and seeing what the process is like. Because the data analysis will tell us the what, it won't tell us all the why. Like, so what's going on under the hood there? And we found where these firms had a good understanding of their firm performance, but also that they were performing really well on a client experience component. And this was the second major finding that we had in the report this year, which was firms that met consumer expectations obviously got more business, had higher utilization rates, and they did so in 2 interesting areas that are really significant client expectations that we uncovered in the customer, that is to say law firms' customers or clients, part of the survey. When inquiring, consumers expected responses inside of 24 hours, especially to email inquiries. And they also expected those responses to be informative, so clear and informative in terms of next steps, what the process would be like. They're basically looking for responsiveness or timeliness and information.
Crazy ideas.
Well, they might sound simple, right? But where things got really interesting for us is we decided to use that as a scorecard and to test run inquiries with 1,000 law firms out there. And the results were a little surprising. So 60% of the firms that we reached out to with inquiries that matched their practice areas as stated on their website didn't respond at all. And of those that did, only 2 out of 1,000 ranked excellent in terms of a scorecard that we put together based on, as you pointed out, Bob, expectations that don't sound too out there.
Right, yeah.
Timeliness and information that's clear, and easy to understand in the responses. So on the one hand, you look at that and think it comes across as a bit of a bad news story, but that's not really what I want. I want everybody to think about the fact that innovating and getting into this top performing category and standing apart from your competition is a huge opportunity, but also a very doable one. Those are things that I think aren't hugely expensive. And going back to your question, those are the specific places where technology can help and where we challenge ourselves as a vendor to deliver the technologies that do.
Yeah, and just to elaborate on that, just so it's clear to our listeners, so you actually hired, I guess, an outside company or something to reach out to 1,000, I don't know, randomly selected law firms, is that fair to say, by phone and email, and see if they responded, essentially, and how they responded. And the results were pretty surprising, I guess.
Exactly.
And did it make a difference if it was if the person reached out by email or by phone?
Yeah, it did. So email was by far worse. Phone was a bit better, but still a ton of opportunity for improvement. So in general, the information communicated over the phone was better.
Yeah.
A little clearer, a little easier to understand via the verbal conversation. And I'll add that, most voicemail interactions led absolutely nowhere. And didn't really communicate well. So, a little bit of an improvement over phone, but definitely lots of interesting work to be done on both fronts.
Yeah. And you surveyed consumers again this year.
That's right.
And what were you looking for there, and what did you find out in terms of?
We really dove this year into their expectations as part of the process and tried to articulate both for those who had been through the legal process or at least looked for a law firm, what their experiences had been, and what their expectations were and whether or not they were met. And the big driver for that for us is understanding more of what we call the latent legal services market. So one of our recurring concepts at the conference here, it was in our CEO Jack Newton's opening keynote talk this year as well, is if we can think about the access to justice gap as perhaps a product market fit problem versus only a cost problem. Certainly there's a huge portion of the access to justice gap that is driven by people being unable to afford access to legal representation or advice. But if we think about other aspects, I don't think price is the whole story. There's a lot of other client experience-based stuff going on that also works against people finding access to legal representation and to revenue that exists out there for practicing lawyers. So that was the vein that we wanted to mine a bit, right? That we wanted to get more information on, and that's where the inspiration came from for this scorecard. So the client experiences that were communicated to us were 64% of people said no one got back to them. Verified when we reached out to those firms and put it to the test. And a lot of feedback around, even for responses they got, not really feeling like they understood, what their next step was, what the overall process would look like, of course, what the overall cost would be for them as a client. And for those that actually had the money and wanted a lawyer, it still acted as a barrier for them finding a lawyer and obviously creating business. Yeah.
So to go back to your earlier point, you were able to create this profile of sort of a data profile of the law firms that have grown, the law firms that have stayed stagnant, the law firms that have lost revenue. How can a law firm take that information, take what you found out of the Legal Trends report, and put that into action in their own practices?
It's a fantastic question, and the one I'm the most passionate about, right? Like, all of these insights don't add up to anything at the end of the day if they're not clearly translatable into action. So a couple of things. Certainly within our product, we do have some functionality available for the first time that we announced at the conference here to empower that. The big one is...
So become a Clio subscriber.
Yeah, well, a little biased in that opinion, but whether it's through Clio or otherwise, I think the important aspect is to learn a bit about the KPIs that we publish and to benchmark.
Yeah.
If you can use those benchmarks, and even we published this idea called the law firm maturity model. If you can kind of rank where you are in terms of firm performance versus where you want to be, you begin to narrow down what you're trying to get to. So establishing those goals. I want to, for instance, improve my utilization rate by 2% this year. So that first step is even getting in the habit of tracking and understanding what some of these key indicators for your business are, at least on the business side of your legal practice. And then I think there are a couple of areas that we see as low-hanging fruit for doing so. So for example, if you compare your utilization rate, once you're familiar with what it is, to what we publish as a benchmark in the report, and you decide, I want to crank that up, you could consider finding ways to convert new business on the intake side. So maybe it's more of my inquiries need to be vetted, made to be a better match for me, and converted into new business for me, into new clients. You could also decide to track your non-billable time and try to understand this 6 or so hours that I'm losing every day. Where does it go? What am I spending time on? And by quantifying that, you then get a picture of, okay, what are some of these things that are taking up a lot of my time and chewing into my ability to create billable work? And how can I use technology to perhaps automate them or at least make them more streamlined? And I think they sound like a lot, but I still think they're approachable things that most folks could do in their day-to-day practice to begin translating some of these insights into results.
Yeah. Do you have any sense from the surveys that you've done of how many lawyers are now using KPIs and tracking KPIs? It seems to me that seems to be something I don't see a lot of.
It's very true. I don't think we have a precise sense, but we did ask a bit about people's level of confidence when it came to managing the different aspects of their firm. And so in the lawyer part of our survey, over 90% of folks said that they were obviously very confident in their abilities as a lawyer. But only around 50% said that they were confident in managing the business aspects of their practice.
Yeah.
And I would assume within that subset, there will be a level of familiarity with KPIs, but not a guaranteed one.
Yeah.
So I think not everyone needs to go to business school, obviously, and not everyone goes into legal practice to be an entrepreneur or a mini CEO, but there are simple ways to familiarize yourself that can be really helpful, and I think that's a really good step. And certainly that's a big driver for us in publishing things like the Legal Trends Report every year.
Yeah. The Legal Trends Report this year is a 62-page document, as I'm looking at it right now, the PDF, which is downloadable from Clio.com, I assume. And are the past year's reports up there as well, or are they all? They must. I don't know if they are or not.
It's primarily the new one, but if folks
yeah.
would like access to a previous report, we can make those available. Yeah. So the one to start with is Clio.com/LTR, short for Legal Trends Report, and the other reports are available upon demand.
Yeah. So we've just touched on, like I said, some of the big headlines out of the report, and that's, we don't have time to go into depth on it in the few minutes we have here. But was there anything else that really jumped out this year from the report?
I think those were the major headlines. Like you said, there's over 60 pages of really good stuff in there. The other thing I'd call out is that concept that we published, the law firm maturity model. It's a simple kind of 2x2 grid and a couple of axes where you can try to value your performance on from the kind of KPI or firm performance side of things, and also on the client experience side. And I think it's just a simple but handy tool to even wrap your head around what are the different aspects of my practice and where might I choose to apply some changes to improve my results, if that's what you decide is the right fit for you.
Good. Well, George, congratulations on all the company's success and news this year, and thank you very much for taking the time to talk with me.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much, Bob.
See you.